Good morning. Welcome to Creating and Sustaining Diversity for 21st Century Policing. My name is Sanz, and I serve as the President and Executive Director of Women in Federal Law Enforcement, also known as WIFLE. Today we only have 90 minutes to talk about diversity and sustaining it, and as you know, many of you have probably participated in multi-day programs. So we're going to pick specific areas of diversity, and we're going to try to keep them short and moving fast. We are going to have about 15 minutes or so per subject. Then we're going to open it up for some questions, so please feel free to ask anything that you think is pertinent. We have on our panel today Rhonda Glover, who is representing the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the National Youth Committee. On the very end is Lori Robinson, Professor of Criminology at George Mason University, and also she served as the co-chair of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And Deputy Chief Carmen Best from the Seattle Police Department. Diversity and retaining it is probably one of the hardest things that you do as leaders in your agencies. Every day you think you're getting ahead, the next day you think you're getting 2 steps behind. It's a never-ending battle, and the landscape keeps changing on us. So we're going to start very simply by just laying the groundwork on the most recent statistics that came from the Office of Justice Programs. And these are the statistics for state and local areas. We don't have these statistics for federal because they haven't been done since 2008, so we're still waiting for Justice to come out with those figures. As you can see, since 1987, we've only grown in the area of women by less than 0.2% a year. And for the most part, since 2007 to 2013, the figure has been stagnant. There's been really no increase in women. The same is also true for Black African Americans. As I was reading the documents, there's 58,000 officers in both categories each, which I thought was kind of unusual that we'd have the same number of officers. The only demographic that's had I wouldn't even call it good, but they've had a substantial increase over time, is Hispanic officers. And part of that is probably because the demographic of the country has also changed immensely. And then, of course, the group that's the least underrepresented in the United States is the Native American, Asian Pacific, and all other categories. And as you can see, they started at 0.08 in 1987, and today they're still they've rise to 3%. So that just gives you the platform from which all of you are working with the demographics of diversity. And many of you know that in some of your agencies, your percentage may be 0 in certain categories. And some of that you can't change. I mean, if you are a university chief, you can't make your police department look like your demographic that you police, which are all 18 to 21-year-olds. So your issues are far different than some of the other chiefs. Most police departments are under 50 people, so just trying to get one person can change your percentages immensely. And losing that one person changes your percentages immensely. So with that in mind, we're going to start with recruitment. We're going to then go to a discussion on mentoring, which is part of retention. And then the third will be the issues surrounding women in general, the recruitment, retention, and promotion of women in law enforcement. So our first speaker is Rhonda Glover, and she is going to discuss recruitment.
Good morning, everyone. Give me some energy here. How you doing? Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. So again, my name is Rhonda Glover, and I'm wearing my National Youth Chair hat. I'm with NOBLE, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. I want to make sure you guys know that. I'm not speaking on behalf of the FBI, although I do work for the FBI. I've been with the FBI for a long time. But what you should know about me is that I am not only a youth motivator, a law enforcement career coach, a diversity maverick. I am an FBI unicorn, and because I am one of 136 black female special agents in the FBI, and I have 29 plus years of law enforcement experience, and I've recruited, and I've trained, and I've onboarded agents and intelligence analysts and professional staff of thousands over the years. So I want to tell you a quick story, because we're talking about, you know, diversity a little bit, and so I just want to kind of just give you a quick snippet, little story about where I think we are the same. So I can look around the room and I can see some faces, some folks that I know that are in law enforcement, and so I'm going to just step out there and just say that you guys have worked with sources, right? Informants over the years, you know, and I know some of you are executives, you're not messing with sources anymore. And I just want to, you know, talk to you a little bit about how, you know, working with sources, we are in that same space, right? While we're talking about diversity, we need to talk about how we are the same. In working with sources, they could drive you to drink, right? Cause you to, you know, jump over a cliff, throw in the towel, and just say, you know what, I'm done. Let me get out of here. I'm done. So for me, I got a phone call from a source. I'm sitting at my desk. I'm 10 years in as an agent at that time, and he calls and asks me for $20. $20. And I'm like, you're calling me, asking me for $20? What do you need $20 for? He said, I need $20. So you're calling asking me for $20, and you haven't given me a name, you haven't given me an address, you don't give me a phone number, you haven't given me any information, but you want me to give you $20. I'm like, get out of here. I'm done. Deuces. See you later. So after that conversation, I just hung up that phone and I said, I'm going into management. So going into management, you don't have to deal with sources anymore. And I just decided I wasn't going to mess with that. So I tell you that story because that's an opportunity to talk about something where we are alike, right? And so when you are in your communities, you want to open that door. You want to open that door with something where you are alike, because in having that conversation, you can start getting to that place and talking about diversity, talking about where things are different, right? And so, you know, I've got some points up here. Can you show my points that I have? Okay. I thought you were going to do that for me. Okay, all right. Okay, you have, okay, cool, thank you. So I've got 5 points to consider. So, you know, and I just want to share with you some things. I may not go in order, but just kind of stay with me on this, because you know, some of the things I'm going to tell you, you're going to win, right? You're going to want to. It's going to make your job easier. It's going to make your life easier, and you're going to win. Your departments are going to win. So let's talk about. I mean, hold up the mirror, right? Hold up the mirror. Take a look at what your department looks like. You need to know that in your core. You need to know your dashboard. You need to be able to step out there and know exactly what your department looks like, so you know how to stretch your department. You need to know what it looks like. So when you have those conversations with people in the community, when you're really trying to recruit and when you're really trying to diversify, because you may not like what your department looks like. The people in the community may not like what your department looks like, but you want to step out there and say, you know what, I know what my department looks like, but these are the things that I'm doing in order to shift my department, in order to have my department look like the community that I serve, right? So you want to know exactly what you look like and where you need to shift. So developing those cross-cultural connections. In doing that, you want to have those conversations with organizations where you want to connect with people that can help you diversify your department. So you want to connect with organizations like the NAACP, the Urban League, fraternities, sororities. You want to connect with them. You want to connect with Hispanic organizations and Asian organizations. You want to connect with different organizations and have those conversations about, I know where we are as a department, and I know what I need to do, and I need your help. So when you're having those conversations, you want to be transparent, and you want to build that trust. So in doing so, with your transparency, you just want to show up honest and just say, I've got a mountain in front of me, and I'm going to climb this mountain, and I need your help in getting over that mountain. I need your help in you helping me structure my department, help me bring in some really incredible talent, bring in some new talent that's going to also enhance the talent that I have. So when you talk about recruiting, and when you talk about having someone go out and represent your department, you want the best out there. I know as I was coming up in my law enforcement career, sometimes we would send the person that's not doing too well, right? When you can't find too much for them to do, and you might say, okay, we're gonna have you go out and recruit. Okay, those days are over. You're going to have to send out your best. You're going to have to send out that officer that looks sharp as a tack. You're going to have to send out that officer that has an incredible career, because folks that are looking at your department, if you want the best, you've got to show up with your best. You've got to bring your best to the table. They have to be decent and in order. And again, they're representing your brand. Right? So you want to think about what is your brand? What does that look like? And so when you're recruiting, you want that brand to just show up and shine. And so in your branding, you want that officer that is just going to represent you, represent the department, to bring in the best talent. So when you're bringing in the best talent, you've got to show up. Again, bring your best. And you want to stretch, go to the next level, think beyond where you are, and think about how you can get there. You have to be very strategic in what you're doing. You have to be able to go to that next level, and you're going to have to think outside of what you've been doing, because what you've been doing is not working, right? It's not working. So you want to connect, again, going back to developing those connections. You want to go back to those connections. Think about how you can go to another level. Where else can I go to bring in talent? I heard that the Navy SEALs, and when I heard this, I was like, wow. One of the things that they do to recruit, so you know how a lot of young people, a lot of young men and young women want to go into the NBA. You have some young men that are interested in going into different, they're going into the NFL, they want to go, basketball. We know a lot of our young people They're interested in, sports. They love sports. They love soccer. They love all kinds of sports. Well, we know they're all not going to get in. We know that they're not all going to be professional players. So what else are they going to do, right? What else are they going to do? Well, you need to be right there to get them. You need to be right there showing up, snatching them up. When they're walking out from trying out and they've been rejected, you need to be right there. Hey, I want to talk to you about policing, right? You want to talk to, you have to be innovative, you have to show up, and you have to be there in order to engage outside of what you're doing. That, you go to the career fairs and you're going to the conferences and you're doing all those kind of things. But sometimes, again, you got to stretch and you have to think beyond where you are. It's not difficult. It may be uncomfortable, but it's not difficult. We tend to reject the unfamiliar. We tend to step back from something that we're not comfortable with. But you have to get beyond there. It's going to feel a little uncomfortable, right? But it's not difficult. So I want to leave that right there with you to marinate on as you hear from the other panelists. But again, diversifying, recruiting, retaining, it's going to make your job easier. It's going to make your lives easier, and you're going to win.
Wow, I hope I can bring that kind of energy to the mic. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carmen Best. I'm a deputy chief with the Seattle Police Department, where I've worked for the last 27 years. I've worked in patrol operations, precinct commander, chief of investigations, and now the deputy chief of operations for the agency. I also, like Rhonda, am a member of NOBLE, the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement Executives. I also chair our United Negro College Fund in the Western region. And I'm on the board at Lakeside School, and I'm also on our travel advisory board for Visit Seattle. So if any of you are coming to Seattle, we'd love to have you there as tourists. That kind of wraps that up. If you show my... So like Rhonda mentioned, she mentioned having a dashboard and knowing your own agency. So this is a depiction of our department. It's really important that we know where we are, and for whatever organization you're with, that you understand what your diversity levels are. It's necessary, we know, to recruit a diverse workforce, and we want a workforce that reflects the community that we serve. And leadership in your organizations needs to be out in front, articulating the business case for diversity in your organization and creating a culture that attracts, retains, and maximizes the value of diversity. Diverse voices allow for an organization to be culturally competent. And I attend countless community meetings where I talk to people, and they always say that they want to have officers that reflect the community that they're serving. They want to have people, they want to see people who look like them, regardless of what that community is, as a part of the organization that's serving them. So we need to be intentional about recruiting those folks. I can tell you in the Seattle Police Department that in 2014, we had about 22% of our applicants from diverse cultures, and in 2017, that's 41%. So we've moved up significantly, 41%. And higher education, very diverse workforce, and we have not changed our recruiting standards in any way. But again, that's been deliberate and intentional. And as you can see by the slide, as you get higher in the rank, you can see that we do a pretty good job of maintaining diversity, but it's a different story when you look at our gender breakdown. That means the pool of women becomes smaller the higher you are in an organization, so the less people you have available to promote to those higher ranks. Next slide. When it comes to recruiting, we are intentional, like I mentioned earlier, in our recruiting efforts. Research suggests that that recruiting people intentionally leads candidates. Research suggests that you have to do intentional recruitment, and that targeting candidates where they live, where they work, and where they play is very important. We have to get outside of our comfort zones. I think you mentioned that earlier. We have to be intentional about going out and finding people where they are. We recruit at about 600 events a year. We have 2 full-time recruiters who attend about 100 events a year. And then we use as a force multiplier, if you will, a number of our officers from different ethnic and women to come out and actually meet with people, talk to them, and bring them into the organization. Our best recruitment is really getting to know the officers that work for us. We have really competent, wonderful people in our organization, and as people meet them and develop relationships with them, that's our best recruiting tool. Additionally, youth engagement is also a big part of our recruitment effort. We have to make sure that we're connecting with young people in a non-confrontational atmosphere where they get to know officers, get to understand police officers, and get to recognize us as an organization that is representing all of them and is intentional about bringing them onto the organization. We have programs such as our Police Athletic League, the Explorers, the late night. We also employ about 35 youth a year at $15 an hour to come in and work for the organization as well. So they get to know officers and see them in their work environment and see them as people. And a part of that also, once we've hired those good people and brought them in, is we have to ensure that we retain them and make their career successful. And a big part of that is mentorship, which is my portion of this presentation. We know that mentoring promotes professional growth, it inspires personal motivation, and it makes us effective in our work. As such, role models are critical to creating diversity. Without role models, we have a difficult time. People have a difficult time if they don't see people who look like them in the higher ranks in their organization. Mentoring helps with the retention of employees. Women and people of color in particularly can sometimes feel isolated where they are at the workplace. So if we develop mentors and help them, we can eliminate stereotypes in the workplace, and it helps push people outside of their comfort zones. And there's a mutual benefit to mentoring. Not only does it help the mentor, in terms of getting to know other people in the organization and the mentee as well, it helps create those relationships that broaden the ability to bring people up in the organization. In the past year, the Seattle Police Department developed the Management Development Initiative. And what we do there is we bring people to 12 or so officers, or middle management actually, and we talk to them, we mentor them on an individual and on a group level to make sure that we have succession planning for our agency. We are very, very intentional about making sure that the people coming up, one, reflect the community, and two, have the access and the knowledge about what it takes to succeed in an organization. Next slide. Historically, women are somewhat marginalized in law enforcement. As we know, they really came into at least in our state, into law enforcement fully in the late 1970s. Before that, we had a women's bureau where they were separated and they wore skirts to work and did work with youth and that kind of thing. And then it was the late 70s that they actually came on doing full-time work, the same work as their male counterparts. And so, for a whole host of reasons, we've struggled even since that time to bring women into the ranks, into policing. Our agency hovers around 14%, which is the national average, but we'd like to see that increase. And so we have a number of programs that we're using to recruit women. And I won't list all of them, but I will just say, once again, you have to be intentional and deliberate. If there's a March for Cancer and there's a lot of women there, we're going to be at that march, and we're going to make sure that we're connecting with women to bring them onto the organization so that we are at the events where women are going to be seen. And also, I will say that it's really important, often people, when they look at policing or they think about it, they see it as, car chases and gunfights and that kind of thing. And we really want to make sure that people recognize that our profession is really about service. We serve people. We see them at their most vulnerable moments. We're able to connect with people, help young people, help people when they are a victim of a crime. And if we can appeal to that that nature in people will bring a much more diverse workforce. I mean, there is a place for repelling from buildings and, all the other things and car chases. I mean, I got into all that stuff too, but there's also the majority of what we do really is connecting with people. And as we give that message out, we'll bring a broader pool of people into the police service. Over the past 2 years, directly in response to feedback from our attendees at recruiting events, our department has emphasized officers of color and materials that are used to recruit diverse communities. And this is one of the pictures, Officer Herrera here. Wonderful woman, well-educated, hardworking, but we want to make sure that as we are putting pictures out and advertising for our agency, that the people in those pictures reflect the people that we want to bring into the organization. And not only that, not that it's depicted here, but we also show them doing things besides, rappelling off buildings or flying helicopters. They're doing things like, talking to young kids or being at a football game or that kind of a thing, so that we show people that we really want to connect with the community, a part of the community, not apart from the community. And there's a lot of research that supports the benefits of mentoring and mentoring women in particular. The reality for women is that women mentored by men often achieve higher status in the organization. And the reason is because there's so many men higher in the organization that they're able to recruit and mentor at a higher level. So we want to make sure that as we get women at those higher ranks, that we're able to mentor other women as well. But men, you have a responsibility to mentor women as well in your organization. You need to be intentional about it and think about it as you're doing it. Next slide. Research shows that mentorship helps promote retention. People relate more readily and positively to peer assistance than they do to supervisory direction. And another important aspect in relationship to development is that officers who develop quality relationships with the people at their job are much more likely to stay within the organization. If you're working for people or around people that you don't like, you're likely to move on at some point. But if you can really develop those relationships and connections within the organization, people stay around. You retain them for much longer periods of time. Mentors and mentees tend to find these relationships mutually beneficial. Mentors help mentees gain new skills and succeed while helping avoid the pitfalls that often we encounter in our profession. And also we open the door to new experiences and opportunities for professional growth. Accordingly, mentors feel self-satisfied when they are helping others in their organization and developing their organization. And I just want to say that I think it's really important. I mean, I can't overemphasize the need to really be intentional and deliberate in your mentoring. As Rhonda mentioned earlier, know your dashboard, know where your gaps are, whether you're reflecting the community that you serve. And if you're not, seek out those people and that demographic in the area where they are and bring them in and connect with them. We always say that we want to be a part of the community. We're not apart from the community. And in order to show that, we have to be deliberate about bringing people into our organizations. And I'll be happy to take questions after our last speaker. Thank you.
Well, good morning. So I'm Lori Robinson. I'm currently teaching, as Kathy said, but I came to teaching 5 years ago from a number of years at the Department of Justice. So I've worked with law enforcement over really all of my career in criminal justice. I'm currently a co-chair and have been for 5 years of one of the IACP committees, the one on research, the Research Advisory Committee. And I'm really pleased to be able to talk this morning about women in policing and the need for us to increase the number of women in the field. And I want to start out talking a little bit about history. I'm glad I can work this thing. And I think back to the landmark report that came out on women in policing from the Police Foundation back in 1972 that talked about the challenges in this area. And in the same year, the fact that Congress passed Title VII of the Civil Rights Act that outlaws gender discrimination, of course, in public agencies, and that opened the door to women stepping into sworn positions. Now, women have obviously come a long way in the field since that time, but at the same time, as we heard from Kathy, women have been stuck too long at that static 12% of law enforcement ranks. But we also know that it's even tougher for women who are of color, women who are African American or Hispanic or Asian, in breaking those barriers. So I think it's a good time, as the field generally is doing a good deal of self-reflection these days, in giving some real thought to this question and pondering how we can do a better job of adding to the ranks of females in sworn positions. But I think before going further, we also should stop and ask for agencies, what are some of the benefits of recruiting women? And so I looked back at some of the research, and I noted that the National Center on Women in Policing had compiled a list of these, actually some time ago, but the research is still solid here. And they listed the following, that women have been found to be certainly as competent as their male colleagues, that they're less likely to use excessive force. Now, that's something that can actually save jurisdictions from costly lawsuits, that their communication skills are good, and that their presence in agencies can reduce problems of sex discrimination and harassment. And I would actually add to that that the problem-solving skills that many women officers possess are certainly something that is helpful in the community policing setting that, of course, so many agencies are now embracing. So if our goal is increasing the number of women, what are some of the steps that agencies can take? And my two colleagues here on the panel have addressed this issue of recruitment, which I want to jump into. And as Rhonda talked about, having some kind of broad plan, an intentional plan, what I would call kind of a strategic, comprehensive plan for recruiting female officers is certainly something that makes a good deal of sense. Kathy mentioned that I really had the privilege of serving as co-chair of the Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And one of our recommendations, as you may know, was that agencies should adopt procedural justice as the guiding principle for both external and internal policies and procedures, and that we said that that was really critical to a changing culture and building trust with communities. And I think that we felt that and the whole notion of emphasizing community policing was going to be helpful in having a more welcoming approach for agencies in attracting a more diverse population of recruits, in attempting to have a population within the department that can reflect the community. And that would include women as well. And I will tell you, as I talk to my own students, the millennial generation, many of whom, quite frankly, are skeptical about law enforcement, I think that kind of ensuring that we're embracing procedural justice is going to be critical in that attraction to the broadly skeptical millennial generation. One of the things that my task force co-chair, Chuck Ramsey, and I talked about was the need for law enforcement, and Carmen touched on this, to think a lot about not only the qualities that we're looking for in hiring, but how we advertise. And we talked, Carmen, about that very issue about the recruitment outreach, and how so much of that is about young men jumping out of helicopters and the like, when in fact so much or most all of what law enforcement does is not that, though it is the kind of most exciting, if you will, portion of it. So naturally, it's something that would be attractive. But if we're looking for things that will focus on the, let's say, day-to-day work of community policing, then, and we're looking for those kind of skills, then perhaps we need to recraft that outreach recruitment material. But in any event, let me zero in on some suggestions for all of you on ways that we might do that outreach. And again, my colleagues have touched on some of these. But we can use social media as an example and technology here. And let me cite an example. DC's Metropolitan Police Department has said that 90% of its applicants initially are in touch with the department via their smartphones or tablets. And then MPD turns around and uses its live online chat rooms to then communicate with those potential recruits. You can tell I'm not real fluent with this language myself. You can also use social media to highlight examples of stories about women in the department and their contributions. They can talk about how they found policing to be a rewarding career choice. And then, as my colleagues talked about, you can arrange for your own female officers to go out to a whole variety of settings, whether it's churches or community groups or women's organizations, to talk about how they are active in their own careers in the department and how the department is serious about opening its ranks to women. You can also focus your recruiting efforts on other public service helping professions, whether it's teaching, it's women in nursing, it's women in social work. You probably pay more than at least some of those professions. And what about women coming out of the military? Also, as you're selling your agency, make sure that you have your female officers out front. Do you have spokespeople who are female representing the department at City Hall, with the news media, at community meetings, at school events? You want to show young women that you have women leaders in law enforcement. Now, still on recruitment, you want to use the women already on your team to help. And I think at least one of my colleagues mentioned this. And on another front, how about contacting the local high school and college to participate in their career days? Now, one of the things that I think is a great idea is to set up internships for students through the local high school. And here's an example that the Tucson Police Department for 8 years has partnered with the Girl Scouts on a one-day camp for middle school girls to encourage their interest in becoming public school professionals. I think that's a great idea. Some have dubbed it the school to profession pipeline. So that's a great notion there. And if you try lots of these ideas and you're still kind of stuck, certainly go back and try to rethink and do that hold the mirror up notion that Rhonda talked about. Let me turn now to training very briefly. One of the things that a more diverse audience may pause about is the traditional military model of training. As we think about policing in the 21st century, I think we need to rethink some of the approaches to training. That's something the task force addressed, to think about a different model than the military boot camp that many police academies still address, and something that might be more amenable to diverse communities, including women, that is based more on an adult learning model and scenario-based training. One other point related to training: if your state post or training academy requires all recruits to live on site, this can negatively affect women or men who have sole responsibility for child care. And that can discourage even the best of candidates. Once a great candidate is on board, of course, one of the things to focus on is retention. So what are the secrets here to ensure a great recruit stays with you? Well, obviously, mentoring is a key here. Carmen talked a good deal about that, so I won't repeat her comments. But I would note that thinking creatively about setting up flexible work schedules, which can also appeal to many younger men as well as women, is something that is definitely worth looking at. Now, on promotion, I think there are a host of other of issues here that we can look at on promotion. Of course, the basic one is whether it is a fair and impartial process as it impacts women. There are many issues here. I know traditionally certain units in policing are seen as male. Rhonda referred to that, and more prestigious, whether it's SWAT, narcotics, gangs, and so on. But they've always been tough for women to get into, and yet not getting those assignments can stand in the way of getting promoted. And a lot of women are still assigned to so-called female units, like juvenile and so on. So I'd say in your department, it's important that women have the opportunity to serve in a broad variety of assignments, and that they're encouraged to do that. So here's an area where mentors and supervisors can really play a role in ensuring there's a level playing field and really encouraging women to go for those positions. Further, the promotional process itself has to be streamlined, and of course, it also has to be transparent as to the procedures and the selection criteria. And there has to be encouragement for women to take the promotional exams. So to wrap up, while there certainly has been a lot of progress since the 1970s, and there are a lot of challenges still with us and ahead of us as we talk about increasing the women in policing, I have to tell you, maybe all of us in this field have to be optimists. I am optimistic. I look at my female students, I look at others in this next generation, and I'm encouraged because I see so many of them who are tough, who are passionate, and I think they are ready to take this on. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions and your comments.
Okay, this is where we're going to open up the discussion. I don't want it to just be questions. I also want it to be kind of a problem-solving area. So if any of you have done anything that you're not happy with the results of, and you'd like to share and open up to the whole audience about, you know, maybe I forgot to do something, or should I do something different, please feel free to jump in and talk to not just us, but the entire crowd. Just a few points. I had the opportunity to speak to the Marine Corps on unconscious gender bias. And one of the issues brought up was about men mentoring women. And one of the findings in research is that when men mentor women and other minorities, they become better leaders themselves. In the private sector, they get higher promotions and they make more money. In the public sector, they achieve higher leadership positions. So there's a great benefit to becoming a mentor. It just makes you a better leader within your organization. and I have to stop and give a plug to a couple of groups. One of them, for those of you that are having problems with your diversity issues, BIACP does have a diversity panel of volunteers that work on diversity issues. So that's a source of help for you, and you can always get a hold of us. There's many of us that are in this room that belong to it or work on it. There are also, I have to give a plug to all of the organizations from Noble to WIFLE to NOLI, HAPCOA, NAPOA, you know, there's an alphabet out there. Each one of those organizations will help you with your diversity recruitment, retention issues. They've got lots of people with expertise that can give you a hand. And for those of you that don't have a great diversity, and you may not have that female officer to go out and help you recruit, steal them. Go to one of the organizations and say, hey, can you come to this career fair and talk to women about becoming police officers? Or can you talk to young African American candidates about becoming a police officer in this community? They'll help you. You know, if you don't have the resources, we can find you resources. So with that, we've got mics, so please feel free. And I'll start with just a couple of questions while you formulate and think about leaving early to go get coffee. One of the big problems that we find in recruiting and retaining women is the issue of standards. And some of them have to do with physical standards and the concept of if we change our physical standards, then we're dumbing it down and we're getting a less qualified person. But when we look at police standards, and being in DC, I get to go to the meetings. As a profession, we really don't have standards because the standards go from having a GED to post-bachelor degrees for the entry level of law enforcement officer. Our fitness standards go from breathing to military standards. And our training standards go from pay your own way through a community college to 8 months live-in academy. And nobody can say what makes the better police officer. So if you can't pick those things, then as a profession, we really don't have standards. We have ideas of what makes a good police officer. And a lot of that is based on how we were brought up. So if we had to do 50 push-ups, then by God, everybody else has to do 50 push-ups because they tortured me and I was an abused child, so we must continue the culture. So I would like you to think about those things and question everything about what we do. Because remember, we started with height requirements where you had to be 6 feet tall to be a police officer. Now, you could be a Navy SEAL, but if you weren't 6 feet tall, you couldn't be a police officer. And then that all had to do with command presence, because you had to be big and strong to be able to do the job. And then when they struck down the height requirements, we found out the 5'2" person could do the job just as well. And they had a command presence, but it wasn't based on size. It was based on how they hold themselves out. So I challenge you to think in those areas about how we need to change and how we need to question everything we do in our profession when we're looking at recruiting and retaining people. And the other thing is, remember at one time when we were all hired, everybody looked at us and said, oh, Jesus, we're going to hell. Look at what they brought on. And then we all got to be leaders. And so the profession didn't fall apart because each new generation came in and challenged everything. Not so sure about the next one, but we're still working on that. So I've talked long enough. Somebody's got to have a question. Go ahead, line up.
Good morning, and thank you so very much for giving us some insight, especially myself. I'm a new relatively new captain with the United States Park Police and out of the Washington, D.C. area. I'm also a member of Noble. Yay. But the question is, I've been recently assigned as the chairperson for our Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and underneath that falls our recruitment efforts. And we haven't done a great job over the past, I'll say, 15 to 20 years that I've been with the organization. And one of the things that I wanted to look at was budget. And I know, speaking specifically to the deputy chief from Seattle Police Department, what is your budget like, and is there a certain dollar amount that's needed in order to fund our recruitment efforts?
Well, you're going to have to dedicate some resources and budget to recruiting. So I mentioned earlier we have 2 full-time recruiters. That's what they do. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and often a lot more than that. And it costs money. We also advertise in ethnic papers and magazines and on the radio, on television. I'm sure a lot of organizations are doing that. You just have to recognize when you are doing your budgets for the year, that is going to be a part of a deliverable that you have to pay for. That's just, I talked earlier about being intentional and deliberate. That's part of being intentional and deliberate. We need to advertise. We need to put out advertisements on buses and billboards and wherever else we can reach the people that we're trying to, the demographic that we're trying to bring into the organization. And about that advertisement, it needs to reflect the people that we're trying to bring in. So yeah, the idea that not trying to do this and not pay for it, that's not going to work. You're going to have to be intentional, have a budget, and have that budget make sense for what you're trying to do.
I have a few comments which may turn into a question or two. My name's Carl. I'm Deputy Chief with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. Our police department has struggled with diversity. We've had roughly 100. We have our African-American population is about 30% of Kansas City, Missouri. Our police department's about 1,350. We've had 160 African-American officers since 1970, and 2017 we still have about 160. And I'm in a unique situation because now I have our human resources. I was a sergeant in our employment unit about 20 years ago. But what I've noticed is that there's 3 areas that you have to change. It's not just the recruiting. It's the recruiting, the training, and then the retention. Because what we find out is we would send a diverse academy class, and then our training division, for some reason, thought it was their ideal to eliminate people. If we couldn't eliminate them in the process, we eliminate them in training. We can't eliminate them in training, then we get them through the FTO program. So you have to look at all 3 phases, and a lot of times you have to make some changes. One change that we did in Kansas City here about 2 months ago that we've already seen a significant positive increase in recruiting is our process time. If you go back to your agency and look at your processing time, you don't have to change any of your standards, but it's kind of ridiculous how long it takes for candidates to go through law enforcement processes, and in the process they leave and go with another agency who can process quicker. So we cut down about 60% our processing time just by having those involved in that process to have a sense of urgency. I'll give you an example. If we have a test, you don't wait until you get 50 people to go to the next process. If you got them done on Monday, get it started Tuesday. Don't wait 2 months to take it through the process. So just from your experience, I had a question on how do you tie in a program that addresses those 3 areas that I mentioned?
I'll start on that. I'm sure the other colleagues have things. Thank you, Carl, for that. And I know that we talked about this the other day, and I thought it was a great idea to reduce the time. So I would say that, you know, our message to our recruiters and to our FTOs and everyone else in our organization is you are not there to weed people out. That is not your job. You're there to help people who we brought in because we believe they're competent, they pass their background, they pass those initial tests. So your job is to make sure if there's a gap there in some area that, you know, that you give them the opportunity to succeed. We want these folks here. That's why we brought them in. And there was this sort of, you know, this idea that, you know, we're gonna be the last defense to make sure we weed out every possible thing that we can. That does not grow your organization. You're there to help people along, to help them if there's an area that they're not as strong in to be successful. And then the timeline, we reduced our time, not as low as yours, but it used to take over a year. It took me over a year to come onto an organization. And so we reduced that down to under 5 months, you know, so still not as fast as we'd like it, but you can't have people hanging out for a year when they're trying to get a job and get in. So we really need to reduce that time, so I would agree. And then not having it take, you know, we just get stuck in tradition. So we bring all these 600 people in, and they take a test on the campus, and then a few weeks later we read it, you know, we figure out who scored high, and then they come back and they take the physical test. Look, we can all do that in one day. Take the test, run it through the scanner, those who scored high are within the range, take them out on the field, do the physical test, and this, as you mentioned, that might change what that physical standard is, but whatever it is, so that you can get people in the door and get your candidate pool ready to go early. I'm sorry. I'll just leave this over there.
I would tell you that in the very competitive private sector, this is exactly what they're doing. They are, in effect, auditing their hiring processes and trying to condense them dramatically because it's so competitive. And I'm seeing more and more in the nonprofit sector in the Washington area and beginning in the public sector, but not very much, that people are looking at their very lengthy recruitment processes and hiring processes. The federal government hasn't even begun to touch this, and their processes, as you know, are just huge. You're very smart to be looking at it, and it has to be driven from the top, because bureaucracies are bureaucracies, and they have, oh, we're going to, you know, wait till we have 1,000 people or something, and then start to slowly process it. So leadership really counts here.
So the only thing that I would add is that if you are not really studying the millennial generation, you really need to do that, because you may need to alter your recruitment practices in order to attract them to your department. And so you have to be very, very cognizant of that. You have to be very, very aggressive about putting together a program that's going to be attractive. That's the bottom line. I'm looking at this point, the last point. They're next. They're next. We cannot ignore that. So we have to do everything in our power to bring them on board and make sure that we are being attractive to them. I talked about it before. Put your best out there to get the best, because you're absolutely right. You have the private sector, you have other government agencies. We're going after the same people. And so we got to close that gap. And because some of the millennials, they don't have an allegiance because they know they have choices. So we have to recognize that. We can't push that to the side, and we have to adjust. We have to shift, and we have to be very, very aggressive and intentional, right, about bringing in that talent and really widening our base. And that's really engaging with that generation that's coming up.
Really short. Here, I'll so I have a little bit of a need. Okay, I have a mom voice, so but I have a little bit of a need perspective. I'm here as a spouse, but my husband and I own a civil service testing company in the state of Ohio. So I'm in the front lines of entrance exams and talking to the candidates as they show up. And there's been a lot of talk in the room about, it seems that fit more larger agencies, but a lot of our clients in Ohio are smaller agencies, 50 officers or less. There is no recruiting budget. They are struggling. We live in the city of Aurora, which is an affluent community outside of Cleveland. I think the starting pay for an officer is $90,000 a year. When I met with the Civil Service Commission, I said, you can't just put a notice in the newspaper and 300 people are going to show up. Those days are gone. They spent about $1,500 on the newspaper ad, and they had 22 people sign up to take the exam. And they're giving the physical agility test this weekend, so more than likely, by the time we get to the written exam, they have 15 candidates. That is a big struggle throughout the state of Ohio for smaller organizations. And when I'm going throughout the state of Ohio and I'm talking to the candidates, they're wanting to answer us, why did you choose to sit for this exam? What brought you here today? He said, most of them say, I found it on the police department's Facebook page, so going back to your social media, it doesn't cost anything. A lot of these agencies don't have budgets and they don't have money to operate their police departments, let alone recruitment. Use the social media. I like the ideas that we had to the mirror effect. Get your female officers out there, get your African American officers out there engaging the community. And but it's a struggle. It's a struggle across the country, and it's a struggle to recruit, let alone recruit minorities. And it's alarming. It really is the number, the deficit of candidates.
Well, we have that same thing. I mean, Seattle has Amazon, Seattle has Microsoft, Expedia, Starbucks. So there are lots of jobs in Seattle for people. So what we found is joining forces with other agencies and organizations, other law enforcement agencies, to bring them into the profession. And I mentioned earlier about appealing to people's sense of service. My kids are those millennials, and they really do have a sense. They're well educated, they can do a lot of different things, but they want to give back to the community. So if you appeal to that nature as well, not just the car chases and gunfights, you'll find that you can broaden the scope, if you will, of people who are willing to come into the organization. But you're absolutely right, we're all sort of competing with people, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but I believe we start out at about close to $100,000 a year for an officer. We have a difficulty bringing them in.
So just before you put your question out, I just want to, when we talk about budgets and maybe not having enough funds to really roll out a recruitment program that could really shine, think about your messaging and think about ensuring that everybody in the department has the same message about recruiting. Because they know people. Everybody in your department, they know somebody. Whether it's a relative, a friend, they can have that conversation. Everybody in the department, they can be recruiters. They may not have that title of being recruiter, but they could be a recruiter for the department, having those conversations with people wherever they are. They could be in the mall, they could be at the gas station, they could be in the grocery store, they could be anywhere, and they see somebody and have that, strike up that conversation. That's not going to cost anything. That's just a conversation. That's just passion, right? That's passion, and that's showing up and educating people that they meet about what the department is doing and what the department is looking for. So think about that.
So you mentioned earlier about folks who pay their own way through community college or other means to get their basic training. There's a notion in my agency that that's a barrier to diversity, that's a barrier to bringing people in. Is there any data that actually proves that out? Is that just kind of a conventional notion or norm? How do you overcome it? And is equivalency transfer a lateral transfer solution that's proven some positive results?
Well, any time that you put dollars onto a requirement, so if you, and this is an issue for the small departments that can't afford to train, whenever you look for the self-certified person, then you automatically cut out a great role of diversity simply because you've got this cadre of people that cannot afford to go to college. So in your community, you would have to work with organizations that do scholarships in that area to help with that. And of course, your biggest thing is to steal from certified departments. And there's nothing wrong with that. I believe in stealing well-trained people. It ticks them off sometimes, but they get over it. But that's true of any requirement. So when you say it's a live-in academy, then you have everybody that doesn't have the ability to travel. They self-select out of the process. If something as simple as you hold the exam someplace where there's no public transportation, well, then you get everybody that doesn't have a car self-selecting out of the process. And when you look back on that, it continually tends to be people who lack money, and people who lack money usually are the minority candidates. So you have to start being more creative in how you approach these things. Does that make sense?
Every barrier is a barrier. So whatever barrier that's there, you should try to eliminate that barrier. And then there's a whole host of things from what organization you have, but you really need to work on eliminating barriers to people, whether it's cost or education. We offer free classes at the community college for people who just want to learn about policing, 5 credits. That's just a partnership that we have with the colleges because it's important. So.
Good morning. So I just wanted to make a couple of comments. You guys are fantastic, and I have a special interest in them because we are all part of NOBLE, and they're also part of the IACP Human and Civil Rights Committee. And so just to lend to the conversation, for me, I'm an assistant chief with the California Highway Patrol. I have like 29 years on, and my foray has been in the area of recruitment and, of course, community outreach. And so one of the things that we just recently embarked on, which might be of interest to some of you if you can, is working with the universities. And so we have a law enforcement candidate scholars program where we're actually part of the curriculum for Sacramento State University. And in that, we hold like a semester class. It's ourselves and Sacramento PD. And we have probably 20 candidates, and they have maybe 25. We're not competing against one another, but we're sharing resources. We're collaborative in this process. They actually get some form of credit from the university. And the goal is they start as a junior, and hopefully by the time they're graduating, they're implemented into our process and hopefully being able to go into the academy. And so they get to come out and experience what it's like to be at the range, to be able to train. We have instructors that come in and actually talk about community policing. We talk about all kind of aspects in the curriculum and ethics. The problem that we're facing, it's brand new, it's a pilot. It came out of the 21st Century Task Force, is the background process. And so I bring that up because you talk about generational differences, we talk about laws changing in different states, and for us, our impact happens to be marijuana because we're in California. And so it has to do with recency and frequency and this culture of our younger generation and how they feel about that. And so it's, having real dialogue about a lot of things, not just diversity, but a lot of our young folks who come from environments where this is around, we can't exclude them because they're associated with it. They can't remove themselves sometimes. So the discussion for us is how do we evaluate in our background process with our background investigators who become quote unquote gatekeepers to people being able to move forward further into the process. And so I just share that that's an exciting program that we're working on with our university. So I encourage you, if you have that opportunity, to network back in your states and seek that out. And if you'd like any more on that, I can connect you with Professor Moffitt at the University at Sac State, who's kind of pushing this forward. So those were my comments, and thank you guys.
Great. Thank you, Chief. And, well, I think we've all talked about that, the fact that, it's really important to partner with with universities and academia on this issue. And, Washington, we are, recreational marijuana is legal. So we had to change we used to have the standard, you couldn't partake or use marijuana in the last 3 years. We moved it to a year because essentially, it's legal where we are, so remove that as a barrier. Tattoos used to be a barrier, but I don't even know a person under 25 who doesn't have a tattoo. I really can't think of anybody thinking about it. So that can't be a barrier to employment, right? We have to evolve with the times. So that's part of it too. So thank you for the comments.
Thank you. Speaking of universities, I'm a retired captain from Boca Raton, Florida. I'm currently the faculty chair for Capella University's criminal justice program. One of the issues we have, and we're talking about recruiting, we have issues too, getting them into programs. So we're constantly recruiting. I recruited when I was at my agency, and I'm recruiting now into our programs. We're talking a lot about changing that message. Matter of fact, we had those discussions this week. How do you change the message? We say it. We know that 5 to 10% of what police do actually has anything to do with crime and arrests and things of that nature. Can you share any successes you might have had changing the message, or maybe somebody in the room? How we go about changing the message? We know it needs to happen. With the ads, with the police car, and the lights seem to always be there. But if we remove that from our message, how do we get across?
Well, I know from times that, I represent the organization at like scholarship things, we're finding that when we talk about women, we have to start going younger and younger. Because very often when you're talking to women in college, they've already got the mindset, oh, I can't do that job. I want to get married and have children. And I'm looking around going, like, half the women I know are married with children. And they're very successful. So oddly, I end up talking to their parents more than to them. Because if I can get mom to do this, then I know there's a chance of recruiting that kid. But if mom's sitting there going, no, my child will not be a police officer, and they're only 16, 17 years old, that kid's not going into criminal justice, not going into social work or something like that with a mindset of becoming a police officer. No matter how much I throw at them about, how great the job is, and it's not anything like you see on TV, and so that's one of the things we have to be cognizant of is the impact of community and family on the recruiting process. One of the other areas is just the mere fact of internally within our organizations, because everybody, it's set up to be last man standing gets the badge and the gun, because it's not a process of education, it's a process of clearing the hurdles. So, you make the test, and then you make the interview, and then you make the physical, and then you make the academy, and then you make FTO. Well, each place you knock somebody out of that process is a cost. And so when you look at like the federal level, the research says that if you knock somebody out after they get out of the academy and they're a special agent, you've spent $250,000 just to get them through that process because of those secret and top secret clearances. With local PDs, it's lower, but you're still sometimes talking in the $60,000, $75,000 arena. So if you get them through the academy and your FTOs are sitting there saying, well, I'm going to be washing people out, well, you just blew 60 grand. Instead of making sure that they're going to be good police officers. So, and I've listened to chiefs talk about how they've set up these really great programs, and then they find out that their staffs are undermining it. And they're saying, well, let me look at the background investigation. They go, oh, chief, you don't need to read the background investigation, which means you need to read the background investigation. And they're finding that they really do see themselves as the last defense against this perceived influx of incompetency or whatever. And when we all started out, we were incompetent. It's amazing we all survived the first 5 years of our careers without getting killed. But, somebody looked down on us and we were very lucky. We have to make sure that that is passed on through that recruiting crew, that training, the hiring, the promotion people, that these are valued people. They're making it through this process. The process is supposed to be a success, not last man standing. It's not good to have a class of 48 and only have 20 graduate. So it's changing the whole mindset, and it's got to be just a constant drone. I mean, I had recruitment and training and everything under me when I was still with ICE, and it was just constant. People trying to put stuff in like, oh, we got to climb a wall. Why? Well, we might have to chase aliens. Go, why? We're special agents. Why would we do that? Well, they might run. I go, yeah, that's why we have perimeters. You know, this concept of we got to do it the way we used to do it instead of looking at a new process. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
I wanted to just jump in and go back to the issue on the millennials, because I think that one of the big issues here, or needs, is to go back younger than the teenage years. I think there is a huge educational role that you all can be playing directly with the elementary school kids. And, you know, the DARE program has been found from research to not really reduce drug use, but what the DARE program has done is to acquaint those kids with law enforcement, with police officers, so that they get to know and trust police. And whether it's through DARE or through some other kind of mechanism, to have your officers going into elementary schools and meeting with kids and getting to know those young people so that they know and trust and understand that law enforcement is not something to fear, but something that is friendly and trustable. And I think that that can stay with those kids through a longer period of time, because it worries me so much to see in my students who are 19, 20, 21 years old, that they only rely on social media for their impressions of law enforcement. I try to turn that around, but all I have is a semester. So this is what I would encourage as far as message changing.
Good morning, ladies. I'm a new chief of a small agency outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. And to give you some quick demographics about my agency, we have 43 sworn officers. I feel like I'm somewhat like Noah's Ark. I have 2 white females, 2 black male officers, and 2 Hispanic male officers, and the rest look just like me. My command staff are, I have 3 captains, 7 lieutenants, and then 6 sergeants below that. Of that group, only one of those minority representatives are in there. I have a female sergeant in that. That's it. So I'm on board with trying to change our diversity recruitment and how we're going to move forward the organization, and I can see how that's a long-term investment. I am facing a lot of retirements in the next 5 years, and I would very much like to have some diversity, certainly in my command staff, but throughout the leadership continuum. But that pipeline, you know, certainly for the lieutenants looking to become captains, there is no one in that pipeline. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what maybe the risk versus reward of bringing someone from the outside and into that command staff when I've got all these folks that are, you know, fighting for the few slots that they know are coming open here in the next couple of years.
Wow, that's tough. I don't actually have the answer, but I know that you're not alone in that. Certainly I showed a slide earlier about our dashboard, if you will, and while we're bringing a lot of people in, it's that we wanted right now to make somebody from a captain to assistant chief, there's no woman of color even in the pipeline. So we have those same struggles. And I was talking to our fire chief, and he's trying to promote, but there's nobody in the pipeline to bring up. And then there's also that tension of, hey, I paid my dues, I worked really hard, I wanted to get to a certain level in the organization, you know, so I need to be able to compete for that too. So there is that tension there. I know that I can say one thing that we did, and I would welcome anybody's responses, because I think it's a really, really difficult problem to work through, is that when I was promoted to a deputy chief, our new chief, who happens also to be a female, one of the few in the country, wonderful woman, Chief O'Toole. She's a great mentor, wonderful chief, great person, but she, you know, pretty much cleaned house. I mean, she started, and there was never, in Seattle had there been a time when we promoted from outside our organization. But she said, very frankly, because I sat through those 2 days of hearings because, you know, the management union challenged it. She just told them, she goes, look, I need to pick my own team. I need a team that reflects the community. I've been in this business for almost 40 years. I know what works. And this is what this is what I want to do. This is what I need to do to bring our agency, that was under federal consent decree, by the way, forward. And so we did bring in people from outside the organization. Never been done before. Actually, one of them was our Perry Tarrant, our Noble president. He came from outside. 40 years of experience in the job, but he came from another organization into our place, and then another chief from outside our organization as well. Didn't really bring diversity, but you know, the point being that she wanted to make sure that she was intentional and deliberate about bringing diversity in, and then explain that to everyone in a way that they understood it. I can tell you, and this is the truth, after we were well into the second day, and the union folks just got up and said, okay, we get it. They just let it go. They said, here's what we want you to do. Can you help us make sure that we have good succession training and a good way of making sure that we have that diverse work pool within our own organization? And so that's why we started that the MDI program that we have in our organization now. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but management development. That's how that began. So again, it's not an unusual problem. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, but I think a lot of us are working through that. Somebody else have a comment on that? Or I think we're almost out of time. But
Just about. Well, I thank you so much. For those of you that are challenged using the IACP system for getting resources, I did print out some copies of the sources of that we all use in our, not only in our program, but in everything we do. So they're here for you. Otherwise, both the presentation and this source guide is on the IACP that you can download for the future. Thank you so much. Have a good